Hi, my name is Jose Ramos, president and founder of Impulse Group. As a group, we stand with our brothers and sisters in the Black Lives Matters movement in the United States. Is way overdue. There's been decades, hundreds of years of discrimination, of prejudice, and we need to take a stand. Globally, the issue exists in every corner of the world, and it's time for us to take a stand. This movement is crucial. We can change history. We can make our world a better place for generations, for people of color to come. So let's take a stand. Enough is enough. It is time for equity and equality for all.
Rise Up is just a song about any type of relationship. It's actually really just about, I look at everyone as we are all brothers and sisters, and we are all sort of a body working together, So Rise Up is really about saying one piece isn't better than the other, and when this part is struggling, I'm gonna help you, I'm gonna lift you up, I'll be that. If you're going through pain, I'll go through the pain with you, if you're celebrating, I'll celebrate with you, So it's just sort of saying, I will rise up for you.
You're broken down and tired, living life on a merry-go-round. You can't find a fighter, but I see it in you, so we gon' walk it out and move mountains. We gon' walk it out and move mountains. And I'll rise up, I'll rise like the day. I'll rise up, I'll rise unafraid. I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. The silence isn't quiet, and it feels like it's getting hard to breathe. And I know you feel like dying, but I promise we'll take the world to its feet. Move mountains, bring it to its feet. Move mountains. And I'll rise up, I'll rise like the day. I'll rise up, I'll rise unafraid. I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. And for that we have each other, and for that we have each other, and we will rise, we will rise, we will rise, we'll rise. I'll rise up, rise like the day. I'll rise up in spite of the ache. I will rise 1,000 times again, and we'll rise up. I like the waves. We'll rise up in spite of the ache. We'll rise up, and we'll do it 1,000 times again.
Welcome to Impulse Cape Town's first installment of Impulse Talks. Today we'll be discussing the Black Lives Matter movement.
Impulse Group Cape Town is a global social movement where we promote and create healthier lifestyles within the LGBTIQ community.
There has been a resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement globally after the killing of George Floyd in the United States. And South Africans quickly joined in on the Black Lives Matter protests, something which is to be expected given the institutionalized racism that people of color have endured, not only during apartheid, but continue to endure today.
In the past, Marikana protesters have been victims of police brutality in South Africa. And of course, during lockdown, we know especially the cases like Collins Khosa and Nathaniel Julies. So these are just a few of the cases that we will be speaking about today as well.
But black life is about more than just police brutality. Black life must be valued at every stage and in every facet of society.
That's right. And when we say Black Lives Matter, it goes beyond police brutality. It's within education, it's within incarceration, it's within economics, and just the everyday racism in society that we find ourselves, especially in the workplace.
And to help us unpack and dissect these important issues, today we have with us an esteemed panel of queer speakers and activists. We have Bayanda Ndomiso, who is the Advocacy Director for Impulse Cape Town, the Curriculum Developer for Equal Education, as well as an activist.
We also have today with us Rowan Roman, who is an award-winning, issue-driven social activist, visual and performing artist, and a youth development worker. And I know him very well from social media, very vocal on social media, and I think he's the perfect candidate to be here today. And then in the center we have Ms. Zoe Black. She is a trans activist, trans rights activist, and digital content creator. She is also the legal and education advocacy officer at Gender Dynamics. That's a mouthful. And she also has a YouTube channel as well as a blog where she journeys through her experiences as a transgender woman, as well as experiences for gender diverse people and how they can go about what they are experiencing in themselves. Yeah. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. Bayanda, where do you stand on the Black Lives Matter movement, and why do you think this movement is so important, not just in countries like the United States, but also in South Africa too?
Thank you, Ashraf. I think I want to start with the notion of we can't start speaking about Black Lives Matter if we do not have access to our own system's realities. And I think it's very important for me to say clear that I think it's about agency and seeing the existing Black lives and giving them attention because they are the one who are the victims of this system that is very violent. I believe that the agency is to know and to share their own experiences and to question the system.
Yes, and as you said, it's systemic and institutionalized.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do anyone would like to add on to that question as well, perhaps?
I think personally, I believe that we can't not be for the Black Lives Matter movement, simply because if we understand our history as a country, if we understand our history as a people of South Africa, it doesn't make sense to not support it because it is in our everyday lived experience. It's all around us. It's in every single province of this country, and it exists. And so for me to then say, I don't believe that this is a movement that deserves my support is to say, I don't believe that my country is a country that deserves my support.
And Rowan, when we talk about support for the Black Lives Matter movement, it's not just people of color that need to be supporting this movement, but we also need white people to be behind this movement and support the movement, right?
Absolutely, I agree. And the reason I think that the solidarity and the support from white people is essential is because the only reason we are in the predicament that we are in as a country, as a people, is because of our history. And if we don't address that, if we don't stand together in opposing that history, it's going to repeat itself. It's constantly repeating itself in very minute ways, as you've mentioned, in the workplace, in everyday society. There are instances of microaggressions, and a microaggression is the start. You know, it escalates and it becomes more and it becomes bigger.
And it's not always overt, but there's always those subtleties as well.
Absolutely.
Zoe?
Yeah, I think I share that sentiment. I think like we can talk about it like even on a global scale, where for I think a very, very long time, even up until today, which is why we have movements like the Black Lives Matter, is that there are particular groups of people who have been disadvantaged in particular ways or are vulnerable in particular ways. And so movements like this are really an attempt to dismantle or reconfigure the system in order to give visibility, to give balance to those groups because they'd been so disadvantaged for such a long time. And I also don't understand the notion about why is it that we don't support movements like this, because the impetus for me is that I would support any kind of movement or any kind of conceptual thinking that supports groups who are potentially vulnerable. And so if you don't support that, it effectively means that you then consistently contribute to that very system that makes those groups and keeps those groups vulnerable and suppressed. And so support really for movements like this are like absolutely critical. And so aside the politic that surrounds it, I think that's where a lot of people get caught up in, where they don't agree with this or that within the particulars, the nitty-gritties of that movement space. But I think deep down people have to ask themselves conceptually, why is it that this movement exists? What is the need for it, and why is it there? And why am I supporting it, or why am I not supporting that movement?
I'm jumping the gun here, but I think South Africa is rooted in racial injustice. We know this as a past, as a history, and especially within race and ethnicity, it always remains a complex issue in South Africa. Why do you think it's so difficult for us as a country to break away from these categorization of humans, is what I call it? You know, when apartheid said there's whites, there's blacks, there's coloreds, there's Indians, and then other, whatever other means. And for me, why I think this question is important is because I've obviously seen on social media how there's a Colored Lives Matter, which is another triggering thing for some people. But why do you think we can't break away from those categories that apartheid has actually put us or boxed us into? Rowan?
Thank you for the question. I think it is a loaded question.
Yeah.
To start, I would like to say again that in order for us to understand the dynamics of where we are as a people, we absolutely need to understand the dynamics of where we come from as a people.
Yes.
And so movements like Colored Lives Matter, I completely understand where it comes from. However, we need to be very careful as a society, especially as a society that is not well versed in its history, about what we put out into the world and what ideas we put out to the world. Because it's very easy to jump on the bandwagon if you don't understand. Because essentially, if you are colored and someone is saying Colored Lives Matter, or you identify as colored and someone says Colored Lives Matter, you identify with that without knowing why they are saying it, without knowing why you are saying it. And that is a very, very dangerous arena. And again, I would like to make reference to social media. I listened to a podcast by Taryn from What's the Quarantine, and I'm not sure if you guys know who that is. But she started this podcast, and she had a guest on there. His name is Tariq Malay. Is it Millet or Malay? I'm not sure. I'm so sorry, Tariq. However, he describes his journey in our country and speaks about our history and the research that he's done. And I learned so much about where we are today from what he shared. And it's very basic. When we think about apartheid and we think about what apartheid has done, and we think about the effects of apartheid that still linger, it's not something that happened when apartheid started. It's something that happened before apartheid started, right? Where if we refer to the term colored back then, and I would urge everyone to find this podcast and listen to it, he refers to the word colored. And what I took from it is, if we think of the word colored, right, and how it was used or why it was used, essentially the Afrikaans word for colored is gekleurd, right? And the opposite of that would be ongekleurd, or I don't know what the other word is, but ongekleurd, right? So in English, if we look at it in that context of colored, and then the opposite of that would be uncolored or not colored or white, right? And that's how white people referred to anyone of color, whether you were black, Indian, Chinese, you weren't white, so you were colored. Your vel was gekleurd, your skin was colored, whether it was colored in my tone, her tone, or his tone, or yours, or anyone else's. If you weren't white, you were colored, your skin was colored, your vel was gekleurd. And to me, that strikes a chord, because essentially all of us were one, right? If you were not white, you were black, right? And the only reason that system was so successful is because they were able to divide that big group. A minority was able to divide the majority into small little sections. You know the adage that goes, how do you eat an elephant? Chunks, right? Piece by piece. And they've been eating us piece by piece, right? And so for me, understanding that, I can't possibly say I'm not for the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think in our country, again, if we don't understand the dynamic of who we are and where we come from, right, we can easily say, you know, that's not for me. You know, I'm a colored person. But if you look at the majority of how colored, or the majority of colored people and how they live today, and the majority of black people and how they live today, it's exactly the same. Especially in smaller provinces, especially in places like the Eastern Cape where I'm from. I can go into an informal settlement and there's colored and black people, right? Yes. Cape Town was so successful in the divide and conquer, and it is so visible, and it is, you can, I mean, getting off the plane at the airport and looking to the left, child, that is not Beyonce, that is, you know, it's visceral, and it's aggravating, and it's irritating, because how are we still there? How are people still living that way, right? And how dare I then say, well, I'm in OBS, so that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You know, it's not my reality. And that's what I wanted to bring this to. I say all that to say this. It is not whether or not the movements matter, right? It's a human issue.
Yes. Yes.
Am I able to look beyond myself? Am I able to look beyond my experiences to see that these are human beings, right? Whose lives are not valued as much as another human being. And so if I can draw that parallel, I can pull myself away from it and say, I completely understand where that movement comes from, and I'm completely for that movement. But if I'm unable to view this as a human issue, you know?
Yeah, and that's what it essentially boils down to, and just sort of based on social listening, seeing social media posts, the comment section, you know, a lot of that frustration is around this idea that, you know, the colored race is so elusive, like, you know, this confused race who don't know who they are. And, you know, during apartheid, it was like, you know, sort of levels of racism with, you know, Indian, colored, black people. And so just based on the conversations that I've had with some people, it's like there's this frustration around how Things like triple BE is applied in the workplace, for instance. There's that conversation that's still being had where colored people feel frustrated that a black person is more likely to get a job over them because of their race. And so that just further divides us. But as you said, it's a human movement. We have to stand in solidarity.
Yeah. And I specifically asked that question because to me, I feel that as a person of color and a so-called colored person, coloreds don't like to break away from what they know. And also, it's what I'm more concerned of is that hatred when they hear, no, but I'm not black, I'm colored. So for me, you can be pro-colored, but you don't have to be anti-black about it, And and back to the question that I asked is, it just comes back to these boxes every single time. So this is why I wanted to know, is there a way that we can break from this, or why is it so difficult for people to break from it? But thank you for the context. Like I've learned a lot now, actually. Thank you so much. Would you?
I think on that, I think the way you phrase the question is like interesting in terms of you talking about like categorization of humans. Just to speak like very like broadly on that. So part of that speaks to how we construct our identities, and one of the ways that we do that, we learn this from when we're young, when we're babies, we learn ourselves in relation to other people. And so we go, okay, I like this thing and you don't like that thing. Okay, so now I know that I like this thing. Or I'm a woman and you're a man. Okay, that's how we're different. And that's perfectly okay. This is how we construct. This is how we identify our friend groups. This is how we find our intimate partners. We find things that are similar to us in the way that we construct our identity to make certain decisions about that. And that's perfectly okay. I think where the difficulty comes in is when the notion of identity becomes caught up in the politics of it. And so when you go, let's say me as a person of color, I go, okay, so because I live in this particular area, all the people in my area are colored, and we have, I don't know, let's say a lack of water in our area. So therefore I'm going to attempt to do certain things to provide my specific community, my specific identity space with a resource that we don't potentially have. And so what people do is people sitting outside that circle start seeing a particular identity group, start making particular types of decisions for themselves around that kind of thing. And so people start having views about that, and not necessarily about the identity group, but about the politic around that identity group. And I think what's happened over years and years and years, the identity and the politic have become one and the same thing. And so people have used those identities to construct political agendas, construct economic agendas that have, for a large part in this context of Black Lives Matter, have constructed an anti-black society. And so that is part of the conversation when we talk about trying to break those boxes. How do we come out of a system and create a new system? We have to start unpacking those very, very deep, intimate, personal questions about how is it that I have constructed my identity within this politic, and why is it that I have those things? And I think that's a very difficult thing to do. It's easy, I think, to talk about what your view is on the ANC's policy on X, Y, and Z, and be outraged that, at this. The very, very difficult work is that profoundly detailed, intimate work that you have to do, because sometimes it means deconstructing your own reality and the assumptions and those very deep personal beliefs that you might have. And sometimes they may not hold true to you anymore. And that's a very difficult thing to process and deal with.
I love that.
I think for me, I wanted to talk about the process of confirming to systemic racism, right? And I think for me, it's important to bring this point because you both of you are bringing across something that I wanted to share as well. But I think for me is the fact that when you grow up, right, there are certain things that you're being taught, right? Whether you're white, whether you're black, whether you're coming from a poor middle class family or a poor working class family, there are certain things that when you grow up and you see, right, and you realize that this is my own reality, right? And when you start confirming to that reality and you start treating other, and you share your own realities with the people that you live around, right? And when you start, you start then protecting yourself from being hurt or conforming to certain things, right? And it's easy for someone who's colored and say that I want to protect my own identity and what I know about myself and my own experiences, right? But also systemic racism is about conforming to systems that are there already, right? So if you work for a school that is very racist towards girls' hair, that are girls expressing themselves through natural hair, and the policies are just say that the hair must just be straight and flat. You confirming to that, you are saying that you are part of the problem, right? You are saying that this is me and I'm also the enabler of what is happening. And I think that's why it's difficult to get out of the boxes for me, because people find themselves in the system and they just conform to it and they just continue to be part of the system. And it goes back to the word, how do we conscientize Black people to understand and to be aware when they're conforming to the system and when they're enabling the system and when they're being they're allowing the system to continue being violent. So for me, I think then the question will be, how do we conscientize our own people to not conform to the system and start fuck shit up, like stop the system and not do it.
And actively protest against that system where the racism is so systemic and institutionalized. And that actually brings me to my next question. I strongly believe that if social movements want to be representative, they must use intersectionality to advocate for the most marginalized members. And so how do we then ensure that all Black Lives Matter, we're talking about queer people, transgender people, disabled people, refugees, women, and all other Black lives along the gender spectrum, how do we ensure that all those lives are valued and represented?
Oh, is that for me?
Welcome.
I was so into the question, I was like, Again, these are loaded questions. What a child. So, funny story. I never speak to my Uber drivers. And you'll find out why I'm bringing that up. I know it's very random. But I never speak in an Uber. I've had a few scary experiences. I've had someone be my Uber driver who was a Tinder match years ago.
Interesting.
And then proceeded to ask these questions about me. And I was like, that's very weird, but I'm going to entertain it. And I remember tweeting it out that I'm in this Uber and it's this guy and it's a match and it's from the past and I'm freaking out.
And he's mobile.
And I changed my address or the destination because my office is close to where I live. And so I thought to myself, let me not be dropped at home and so that he knows where I live, right? And I'm freaking out and people are like responding and someone DMs me and says, please let me know when you're safe and whatever. And I get off at work and I take this deep breath and just a sigh of relief. But then this morning on my way here, the Uber driver spoke to me again. And I'm thinking, oh God, not again, not another one. I need to stop swiping right.
Swipe the other way.
But he's asking me where I'm going. And so I explain to him and we start this conversation. And we start speaking about the state of our country and the state of everything. It was a very enlightening conversation. But when we were speaking, I remember thinking to myself, I wonder what I'm going to say to this very question. Because again, if I don't see the transgression, the violence, the hate, if I don't see the fact that queer people, especially trans people of color, are murdered so often as something that is a deep, very deep rot in society, an illness. If I don't see that as that, and I don't see the issue again as a human issue, I can't feel anything for it.
Yeah.
I
Yes.
won't feel
Of
anything
course.
for
Sure.
it, right? And so when we speak about Black Lives Matter, it's fantastic when it's about a specific issue, like someone getting shot or a straight man who is black getting shot and died, right? So he dies, it is complete chaos, it is uproar. We are all feeling it because he's one of us, he is a man, he's a man of color, he was killed in complete just like senselessness, right? Then we scroll down our feed and there's footage of a young trans woman being brutalized. And you look at the numbers, and it sounds very like fictitious, like, oh, why would you speak about that? But if you look at the numbers, if you look at the views, if you look at the comments, if you look at
And
the
like,
shares,
yes.
versus the same, essentially the same thing we're talking
Yes,
about, a
yes.
black life, whether it's a black trans life. It's not, it shouldn't be in question if we're all saying we believe,
It's as if we
Black Lives Matter.
sympathize differently.
Yeah.
and
Yes.
that's the point that I wanted to
Yeah.
get to. We sympathize differently because we were conditioned to sympathize differently. So the same way in our developmental stages, how we were taught to, I guess, be. We were taught what we like, we were taught what we don't like, and we then develop our own sense of thinking. Okay, so just because you like that doesn't mean I should like that, right? So you start thinking independently. But there are some things that hold on to the conditioning that don't seem to want to break away from being taught something and finding out something for yourself. And that comes into play in topics like these because as a society, young boys are taught, right? If you see someone that does not look masculine or talks like a girl or cries, that is a muffy, that is,
A bunny.
you know, a bunny, that is all of these things, right? So you grow up with that, even though you are developing independently in other things. I like certain sports, I like certain cars, I like certain clothes, right? But that part of your identity is still conditioned
Yes.
because of what you were taught.
From the moment we are born, yes, those
You know?
gender stereotypes are enforced on us with something as simple as colors having gender reveals. You know?
Exactly. That still happens today. Why do I have to see a balloon being popped to know that
Yeah.
it's going to be, you know what I mean? Why is that prioritized?
Yes.
And that is something that we
Over a healthy
condition
baby,
our
actually.
children, right? Because now a trans life is taken away just unjustly and cruelly, right? But it doesn't affect me at all, right? A gay life gets taken just senselessly and it doesn't affect me, but a straight life,
Oh.
okay, you know? And that speaks to the hierarchy. And again,
course.
it comes to the identities because we are so, and I love that you were speaking about how these identities are almost binary for some people, right? And that shouldn't be what identity is. I mean, if you think about identity, yes, it's amazing to be able to say that I am X, Y, and Z, but those things can always waver and change, right? How much of that work are you willing to do? Okay, last week, my identity was X. Why can't my identity be B this week? You know what I mean? Because as we grow and evolve, things change. Everything can be an identity. Your language is an identity
For sure.
or an identifier,
Agree.
right? Your culture, religion, so many
Race.
things can be identities. But there are certain identities that we are so fixed in and that we almost are obsessed with. But we don't understand why we're obsessed with it,
Yes.
right?
Or they're normal.
It's this or the other, yes. Them and us,
Yeah.
this and that, right? And we need to start questioning that. And it's a very uncomfortable thing to do. It's a very uncomfortable job to do, to sit with yourself and go, okay, that was problematic. Let me engage myself and find out why I think like that, why I act like that. But we don't do that because it's easier to not do it,
Yeah.
right? And so we can never evolve as human beings if we don't work on ourselves. Because the work on the self is the most important work.
Of course.
You can't ever engage with other people if you don't know how to engage with yourself. Same way you can't be with other people if you can't be with yourself, right? There's the saying that I always go back to, people will only ever meet you as deeply as they've met themselves.
For sure.
Which means only if
And
I
you say,
know.
our questions are loaded.
So essentially, I cannot engage with you if you haven't met yourself.
Yeah, of course.
And you cannot engage with me because we're going to clash. Because you don't have empathy, you don't have the skills to be able to deal with someone who thinks differently. Because the moment we think someone thinks differently, it's a battle. You know, it's a challenge.
Yeah.
Now I must measure something. You know, I must show you what I know. And it comes back to the humanness again. Sans all of those things, I could care less about intellectualizing an argument or semantics or how you feel. Because at the end of the day, my fight is with two things. It's with myself and where I am in my development, and it's with the notion that people can be better than other people, because I don't think that should exist. That should never exist, because the reason that exists is the reason we are where we are, right? It's because I can pick a BB cream that says 02, and I feel better than you because your BB cream says 10.
Yes.
Do you understand how that
Yeah.
even sounds dumb? Like it makes no sense, right? But that's how we live, and we need to start breaking those walls down, but we can only truly do that inside and start with ourselves.
Agree.
Otherwise, it's all pointless.
Yeah, I think I wanna, because I don't wanna forget what I wanna say. I think when we talk about intersectionality, as a teacher myself, I know that when you are doing a workshop, right, and you are doing a workshop, everyone that approach the classroom door, you have to see them beyond their name. They're coming from a poor working class family. They are black, they are gay, they're lesbian. They have one person, have different identities, right? They have their own beliefs, their own principles, and so on. So for me, I can give you another example. Just because you believe in gay rights, it doesn't mean that the education system that didn't affect you, or poverty didn't affect you. So when we speak about poverty, let's not leave you out, because that is also you. It affects you. So for me, I think when we talk about intersectionality is to recognize that you are not just one thing, right? You are everything. Everything that affects you, you are that thing. And we need to see you. We need to hear you, and we need to realize that it affects you. And for me, that's what intersectionality means. And if movements, even if movements are focusing on gay rights, I still believe that movements needs to start practicing intersectionality, because it's not just about that one thing, because that one thing can lead to other things. We can't talk about education without talking about poverty. We can't talk about trans lives without talking about gender-based violence. We can't talk about queer lives generally without talking about the violence, the education, what affects them the most and where they come from, right? So we need to start linking other struggles to the struggle that we see, or what we see, so that we can see and so that we can feel and know. That's where, for me, the problem is. The minute you are so focused to one struggle, you start not seeing other people. You start practicing devaluing. When someone is expressing, oh, this is how I feel about this, then you start saying, oh, your issues are not that important. My issue is so important. So now we are playing, what issue is more important than the other. And intersectionality is not about that. It's about seeing all struggles the same and making sure that if we want to eradicate that system, which is the unjust system, we need to see those struggles, right?
So in the context of like broadening that notion, and I think something that you said was like sitting with me, and I've been trying to process it for myself, I guess, while I'm sitting here. So again, context with like Black Lives Matter into how that extends into like other facets. I mean, we talk specifically about intersectionality and other aspects of identity and how that, I guess, feeds in and works with broadly one's identity. On the trans thing specifically, now I just want to talk from my personal experience, and it is something that you brought up as well. For me, in my experience, when people see me for the first time, the only thing that they can see about me is the fact that I'm trans. So I remember coming out and still presenting as very, very masculine. People refused to recognize that about myself. They were just like, okay, no, you're confused or you're something and we're not seeing you and blah, 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 blah. And I understood where that came from. Not condoning it in any kind of way, but I got the position. I'm not saying that's okay, but okay. And now I don't necessarily have an issue with people when they see me have an issue with me. But the second I open my mouth, and I've got a very deep voice, the second I open my mouth and people go, oh, oh, you're trans. And then that's the only thing they can see about me. And so every aspect of my identity is completely overshadowed by that transness. Now, I'm not saying that that the transness isn't necessarily important, but the perspective of the viewer here is so critical because how they place me in terms of their hierarchical structure about what is important to them now suddenly becomes a factor.
Yes.
And so speaking to that notion about empathy, I think when we talk about Black Lives Matter, when we talk about things like gender-based violence, people set those priorities for themselves in relation to themselves. So if you are hypothetically let's say, a straight cisgender white man, a lot of these issues don't necessarily directly impact your life. Yes, it does impact your life in certain kinds of ways, but you're not necessarily the direct, let's say, victim of that particular system or that particular type of situation. And I think for a lot of people, this is how we operate. We see a group of people, or we see identity, or we see a struggle, or we see a something, and we place that struggle in relation to ourselves, and we go, oh, that's not my fight, because I don't identify with that. That doesn't affect me. And by extension, therefore, I should not be involved with that. They must sort themselves out. Us and them, you and me, constant thing in opposition. And what that really does is that if everybody said that, then nobody would have anybody in their corner ever. And that's a difficult world to live in. And so I really think, while empathy is profoundly important, empathy for another person, I think one of the things that where we place that empathy is important. I think when we place empathy in things that resonate with our identity, I think to a certain degree that's problematic. Because the minute I can't empathize with something, then I dismiss it. Because there are things in my life that I can't identify with at all.
I
can't do that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that on principle that I can't advocate for it, that I can't recognize that just because a straight, white, cisgendered man gets murdered in the middle of the Karoo, that I can't say that that's wrong, that shouldn't happen. I should be able to say that even though I don't identify with it. And the same is true for if you are a white person. Just because you're not black doesn't mean that you can't advocate for black lives, advocate for the movement. Just because you're cisgender doesn't mean that you shouldn't necessarily advocate for protection of trans people. And people say this, and I want to bring this back into my personal context again. I'm often the first trans people that people meet. There was a study that was done in the US not too long ago that for, I think, the most of Americans, they don't know trans people, and that's why they just don't engage with trans lives. And so, hi, people watching at home, if I'm the first trans person that you're meeting, hi. But just to give context to that, in the United States, a study was done that the average lifespan of a trans woman in the US is 35.
Sure. That's shocking.
I'm 32 now, which means I should be dead in 3 years, technically speaking, on statistical average. And those are the things that people don't see when we say we can't identify with stuff. We don't interrogate it further than just the identity politic of it. If it's something I can't identify, I dismiss it. We don't go further, and we don't go, why is there a Black Lives Matter movement? Why are they being murdered like this? It's just, again, that deeply intimate personal work. We have to start there. We have to start there.
Yeah, and we just tend to sugarcoat things, putting up this united front, we're Rainbow Nation, and even within the LGBTQ community, it's like gay cis men, like, are you really standing in solidarity with transgender people, for instance? Like, I've had to call myself out on that in the past, and question myself on that. It's like when I think about pride, like, most representation is from gay men. You don't really see the other part of the community being represented. And we really need to do better.
Yeah. Yes. I think it's nice to just wrap up that particular question with back to what you were saying earlier. It's a human context,
For sure.
and not a who is more important. And I think today's discussion is also we are not being just for the LGBTI community, but it's a human equality, or we just want to be on the same as every single one. Going back to the comment that you made about posts like a straight man being people having less empathy for someone who's a trans, but they both have experience the same violence. So why isn't there an equal empathy given in particular? And then I'm sure a lot of you will remember the Roads Must Fall movement. It's a throwback for you, but it's quite fresh in a lot of our minds still. And I mean, these have been similar protests with institutionalized racism. Why is it important for us to be robust in removing statues and monuments that honor white supremacy? Do you think it's important to acknowledge, yes, they were part of building a road and now the road is named after him or her? Or should transformation actually be happening, and with all these name changes and removing the statues? What do you think is important about removing statues?
Yeah, because a lot of just on that, a lot of people of color, they feel that it's a trigger as well. So I think it's important to unpack that.
Yeah. Bayanta?
Look, when we talk about transformation, for me, it comes in different phases, right? There is the self, right? You start working on yourself, which is what you talked about. Let me conscientize myself. Let me learn more about myself. And then you move towards, how do I relate to others, right? How do I see myself with others, right? But also, what is it that is around me that moves me 5 steps backwards, right? So there are certain places where I know that someone died right there. There are certain places where I know that someone was standing there and that person was homophobic to me. So when I'm about to approach that corner, I know that that person might be there or someone else might be there. That corner, I know that people say these things when I pass. You obviously don't want to go past there, right? And I'm making like a very simple example. But for me, I think it's very important to start realizing that we are a society that is moving towards a South Africa that is not recognizing the past, recognizing the people that perpetuated apartheid and still gives them the platform to exist. And these are your statues, these are your buildings and so on and so on and so on. And for someone who is also being a victim and survivor of the system, it's a constant trigger for me. If I see, a statue that reminds me that your life does not matter. Someone that did not see me, someone that did not see my ancestors or my parents. So for me, I think it's very important when we talk about transformation, let's just wipe everything. Like, there's no excuse for us to still have the street names of the people that contributed to apartheid or who devalued our lives. I just don't see why we must have them in place.
I can tell you have a lot to say.
No, it's not. It's just like it's a weird thing for me. Like, I find. So when we talk about things like the statues specifically, because it's a nice like concrete example. So
no pun intended.
Yeah, literally.
These statues, these monuments, they sit in public spaces, and by the very notion of it being public, the public therefore access it. And so, I think the impetus here is that these monuments and statues were created to honor particular persons, and so at the time in that society, for a particular group of people, that person or that monument represented something that was important to that specific group at that particular time. That monument does not have that same value to other people, and it doesn't have the same value in the context in the time that we have. So we have to reevaluate our positions all the time in relation to these specifically public spaces as to whether a thing is appropriate for its context. And things like, when we're talking about things like honoring people of the past, I am very much of a view that any kind of honor, that should be reserved for things like museums. These things, it's not, I don't think it's problematic to capture our history. I don't think it's necessarily problematic to honor certain people in particular types of ways, but that has to be placed in a very specific context. If you walk down a garden and there's a statue of somebody who like killed so many people and this person is being honored, that's a problem. It's okay that we recognize that this person exists, but put that in a context where people can be like, send it there. So you want to go learn about that part of history, then you go to a museum and you go learn about it there. The notion about putting a thing like that on display for public is that you effectively, what you're doing is you're subjecting every single person to the celebration of that person's value and putting that on everybody else. And I don't think it's appropriate. I would even go even further than that. I would even say that we shouldn't even be naming, might get a lot of flack for this from the viewers at home, apologies, but not really apologizing. We shouldn't be naming streets after things like struggle heroes and things like that. I think it's deeply problematic because I promise you we're going to get 10, 15 years down the line and realize, that person was problematic in this particular type of way. Oh, this struggle hero that we valued so much actually beat his wife. It's problematic because nobody's perfect.
Yes.
And so when we honor people in specific kind of ways, let's honor them in those specific kind of ways. Let us not broaden them and make them immortal in the street names that we give to people, in the statues that we erect. Again, let us place that in context. It's so nice when I go into an area and the streets are named 5th Avenue and 7 de Laan. It's like, it's wonderful. Like I'm not confused. I don't know where. Google Maps is excellent to navigate to those places. It's just, it becomes so tricky because also, again, the society that is making those determinations about what should go where in public spaces are also, again, placing it there from their relative position.
Yes.
And we do live in a very strongly patriarchal society, and that is the perspective. And we may move away from that one day. And then the same problems that we are having with the statues today, we will potentially have with the street names further down the line.
Just when you mentioned the public space, I immediately went to that statue that's on the parade, right in the center, and then you have a Nelson Mandela statue across the road, but you can't see the statue actually. You can't notice it actually, but the ginormous. Is it Queen Victoria or is it her husband or wie is it?
I don't know.
Let us know in the comments.
Honestly, I don't care. Like, to be very honest, like
but what I'm trying to say is like, why wasn't that particular one that's on the parade? Why wasn't that moved to a museum instead of breaking it down? If you know, and then perhaps moving the Mandela one over to. But then that's just more problematic again and again. So we are never satisfied. I don't think we're ever satisfied.
It's the same problem over and over again. So now you move Mandela there, and then I don't know, what about the queer trans activist that was not recognized and thing? Now do we move that in place of Mandela? It's too messy.
And the baby walking past, waar is die kleerlinge? It's just problems on problems. Yeah, understand. Rowan,
Excuse me.
2 cents.
2.5.
It's going to be 2.5.
Here.
Start at the very beginning.
I think, and again, this is my perspective. I'm gonna tie it into what you were speaking about with pride. If we speak about representation, the fact that these statues or these monuments or these street names or whatever you want to call them exist and live in certain spaces. And I'm going to narrow it down to just the Western Cape and Cape Town specifically. But I mean, they are everywhere. If you've ever been in other provinces, they are there. For me, the issue with that is, like you said, it meant something to a specific group of people at a specific time in our history, right? I don't think because the landscape of our country shifted that their meaning or the meaning it holds for them necessarily shifted. If that, do you get what I'm saying? And so that remains a beacon of hope, a beacon of light, something to hold on to that reminds you of, and I've often heard this, the good old days, right? There's a very specific group of people that can say that. The old days were good days. Very specific. And for me, it's like if you take our old flag and you go put it up in the middle of the parade to honor what it meant in a specific time for a specific group of people, what do you think is going to happen? What would that say about us as a people, right? Everything that and I might get flack for this too, quote unquote, Rainbow Nation, ding, has stood for and aimed, because I mean, on paper, it's beautiful. Same as our Constitution, gorgeous document. Translate that into real life, where? You know, where does our Constitution translate into real life? It doesn't.
It's window dressing.
Every country I've been in, when I tell people I'm South African, and it's often in the social justice space, they go, your Constitution is beautiful. You're so progressive. And I just go, okay, that's nice. Come live there for a bit. As a South African, not as someone whose exchange rate is going to make you middle class or upper middle class. Well, I don't know what the classes are actually. I need to go look. But you know what I mean? Because they'll come here and they want that experience, but you can't have it because it's not a lived experience. It's not something you'll ever live through, right? And so the fact that these monuments exist, the fact that these things, these places exist, is a constant reminder and a constant trigger, but a constant source of remembrance. And I'm not saying they need to like completely deny where they come from, or, you know, if you're proud of whatever, whether I think it's a problem or not, it's fine, be proud. But acknowledge that someone is going to object to your pride for something. And whether you get the reasoning or not doesn't mean I'm going to be quiet about it, right? So now this monument is erected or it's unveiled and it's a big thing and we hear that this person did A, B, C. I'm pretty sure if I do a quick Google search, I will find a lot of things that this person also did that we shouldn't be praising. But it comes down to representation. Because that thing represents a specific thing for a specific group of people. And again, it's all coming full circle in the fact that it feeds into this notion that, yeah, once we had power and once things were so great, but again, they're removing themselves from the greater context of who did that power impact? Who did that power violate? Who did that power break down, kill, murder, you know? And if that is something that people want to hold on to, then I really don't understand what the purpose of us moving forward is, right? I personally do not believe in this Rainbow Nation cuck, to be honest with you, okay? Because the fact that, and I can put myself, I guess, into this specific president's shoes and go, what would stop the next civil war? Peace, harmony, representation. So, a black person leading, having power, quote unquote, representing them in politics. Representation. I see someone that looks like me. I see someone that looks like my father. I see someone that looks like my grandfather. We can vote. We are free. Are we really free? What happened between then and now? Absolutely nothing, right? Because holding political power versus holding economic power is very different things. And even though we got political power, economic power was held where it was and still is. And that gap is what keeps us apart. And that gap is what represents our history. And that gap are things like these structures, these systems, these statues, these names, right? Because the history of Stellenbosch, child,
It's another topic.
you know what I mean? But when do we start to actually say, or when is the voice that is unified amongst us as the oppressed, or amongst people as the oppressed in general, loud enough for the oppressors to care? When does that happen? You know, how many more deaths?
Yeah.
How many more just senseless stuff? And it's infuriating because now you think about, so what future, if ever I decide to bring children into this world, what future am I leaving them? Right? If these things are in place, if these statues, if these monuments are in place, how do I explain to them? Because again, it's window dressing and it's nice things that are said about them, but I'm robbing my future or my future's future of knowing where they come from and knowing what made them. So I think that's an important thing to hold.
So it's almost time for us to wrap up. There's one very important thing that I'd like to close off with, and that's just on the topic of healing. You know, I think there's a link between, you know, obviously facing oppression and your mental health, especially as queer people of color, oppressed in so many different ways. Do you also believe there's a link between racism, homophobia, etc., and mental health? And why do you think it's important for us to confront things like racism and homophobia and transphobia in order to heal from it?
Who's gonna go? Sorry?
Jesus.
For 5 marks.
That's I'll give you an essay for 50, but time. I don't know. There was an interesting article that I read a number of years ago that was done on infants and toddlers growing up in what they termed as hostile environments. And they studied their behavior over a number of years. And did all kinds of, and I know the ethics of it is a little bit questionable, I guess. I didn't do the background homework on it. But they went for brain scans. And what they found was that with children specifically, who grew up in environments where they were of less economic means, where they struggled for basic things like shelter, food, water, when those basic things weren't met, literally the brain chemistry of those children changed over time to become, what is the word? Defensive, more closed off, boxed off. So this is a very human thing that we do when we feel threatened. We tend to lager, we protect ourselves. And so for children specifically growing up, it was fascinating reading this article. I can't remember where I read it. That they had developed that as part of their biology. A defensive nature to these adverse circumstances. And I think about my own experience, and I think about the people around me. Being in a position where you are constantly under threat, where you're constantly fearing for your life, where you're constantly thinking, is this going to happen to me? Am I going to be able to get a job? Can I even afford to have children? The constant thought of that directly impacts your mental state and your emotional state. And over time, that can have all kinds of consequences for you. I think about myself again in that context all the time. There were times where I had to go through therapy on end because there were things in my life, not that there was anything wrong with me, but there were things in my environment that I couldn't process, understand, or deal with, that I needed some sort of thing to guide me in understanding what those things were. And I think for a lot of people, being of color, being queer, being a woman, those things matter. They impact you all the time. And that's one of the things that nobody wants to talk about, I think. I kept saying this specifically under the lockdown. Government had pushed all these things, health measures in place, like it's COVID-19, we've got a social distance, and one of the things I never heard the government talk about was the impact of social distancing on people's mental well-being. Not once did I hear any minister speak to that. And it's had a profound impact on the way people are engaging with other people.
Yes.
And that's something small, like just being isolated from people. Now imagine experiencing that for your entire life, somebody telling you that your life doesn't matter, that you can't achieve this, that you're less than all the time. It's going to impact you. So that is something I think that really needs to be, I think is a whole conversation on its own that potentially needs...
and although like mental health has been stigmatized, especially in some communities of color, all of a sudden with lockdown, it's become more of a universal topic because now most people are experiencing anxiety or depression. So yeah, it would be interesting to see where we go with that moving forward.
Any other comments? How do we heal from racism? I know it's brewing down there, Bayanda.
I think for me, I'm just going to go back to what I mentioned first, right? I think as queer people, I'm going to speak for myself, right? I know that I've done the work, right? To know myself and to know what I want and the kind of safety and safe spaces that I want to be in. What becomes the problem for me is someone that is going to say to me, hey, I understand who you are. I understand what queerness is, right? And then when homophobic statements, or when someone is becoming very homophobic, all of a sudden, now I don't understand. I didn't get that homophobic statement, or you protect yourself. So for me, I think as long as we are saying that it's Bayanda, do the job because this affects you, we are not going to end. We are not going to end what you're talking about. People need to take it up on themselves and their own responsibility to stop whatever kind of violence against humanity, right? It shouldn't be, it affects you, then it's your baby, right? It should be about, hey, what you're doing is wrong, stop it, right? For me, as I stressed this before, people who are enabling such behavior and such things are the one that makes it okay. Because what if Bayanda can't talk? What if I've been silenced enough to not even defend myself or to say that I don't like this? Your responsibility as the person who heard and saw is to stop it, right? So we need to start realizing that it's not about the victim or the survivor. It's about the people around the person also to stop it. So for me, I know that has affected me personally. I went on depression because I felt like everyone around me did not protect me. And their responsibility was always, protect yourself. Why can't you do it? If I can't do it, what is everyone around me doing about it? Right? So I know that sometimes being depressed is not about what you go through. It's about how other people don't see you and realize that you hurt or what is going on to you is hurting you. And just saying, deal with it. It's your baby. It's your thing.
I
Very
think
briefly.
three things for me. Number one, racism is a state of being. It's a state of mind, right? It's taught. It's often quiet. Lately, quite loud sometimes. But it's a state of mind. And through learning and understanding what a mindset or way of thinking or frame of mind is, all comes back to the same thing, working on self, right? Now, if you don't identify your behavior as problematic, you will never work on that behavior.
Of course.
And so I almost don't want to say this because it often puts the onus back on us to educate them. And I am tired. I am exhausted. I have been this person for as long as I can remember. And until the veil, fell, I guess, if I can put it that way. I never understood what racism was. I never understood what prejudice was. I never understood what violence was until I got out and looked back and went, ooh, that grade 5 teacher done said some problematic shit. Ooh, that principal, and unfortunately and fortunately, I was raised in an area, in a school, where I was, for the longest time, the only person of color in my class, in my grade. I never knew that was a problem until I was in a different school where there were people like me, and I looked back and I was like, ooh,
That's how it feels.
That's what that meant. And I'll never forget my very first day at this new school, where I was in grade 4 or something, and these kids said to me, oh, this person, when they come back to school, this person's gonna murder you, he's gonna murder you. And I was like, child, I'm from the ghetto, I wish he would. Let him come, but I was so anxious about it. I was like, oh my God, what is this thing that they're talking about? Eventually comes to school and he says to me one day on the rugby field, we're going at it, we were playing rugby, but he kept tackling me. But it felt like this isn't a normal tackle anymore. That's not how you're tackling him. I'm being tackled, fam. And eventually he is on top of me and my hands are next to me. And now I'm a big boy. I've always been a big boy. I do not know your life, okay? I was just like, you know what? This some bullshit. I done flipped over onto him and I did the mess, I was pulled off, and he shouted something at me while we were being pulled apart. And he said something along the lines of, at least I wasn't the one who fell down the toilet. Now, I'm in grade 4 or 5. I have no idea what this means. I'm from a community, it's gate vir my, ek gaan vir jou teruggate. So I was like, I think you got that wrong. You fell down the toilet because he had freckles. I said, you fell down the toilet because where I come from, that's kakspatsels. That's what I said to him. And the crowd went wild. People were like, oh, because that made more sense to me. Right? It wasn't until high school that I realized him saying I fell down the toilet was a reference to my skin color. Grade 4.
Wow.
Where did he learn that?
Exactly.
And so those things are perpetuated. And if they are never addressed, and I mean, I love Jeffreys Bay with my entire being, but Jeffreys Bay is mini Stellenbosch. You know what I mean? It is still very white, still very segregated, and that's how people think. And so I'm tired of being the one to have to educate and say, the way you're treating me is this, that. No, I'm done. Listen, if you have access to the internet to troll in my comment section, you have access to the internet to Google yourself and where you're at in your way of thinking and understanding. And address it. It's not my job. It is not the job of queer people to educate straight people. It is not the job of people of color to educate white people. If you are the oppressor, you need to do the work. We are tired of doing the work. We are exhausted. It cannot be a constant battle.
Agree.
I was going to say 2 other things, but that's that on that. And I'm like, I just...
Thank you so much for this wonderful, wonderful and educated and informative conversation and discussion. I think this was also the initial idea why we wanted this, because with so much happening around the world, and we wanted to have a forum where we can discuss how we can move forward from these things. And I think within lockdown, you have so much time in your hands that you want to know, what is happening right now? Why is this happening? How can I be a beacon of hope? How can I change the world or my world and my community that I live in. And a big thank you to Rowan, a big thank you to Zoe, and as well as to Bayanda, and of course my work husband, I call him. My Ashraf Bouli is the president of Impulse Group Cape Town. And if there's any other remarks that you would like to make, just to so we can.
I just wanted to say
Yes.
thanks for all your great insights, and thank you for sharing your subjective experiences as well, just added to the conversation. And it was a really meaningful conversation that I hope we can take forward, because there's still so much for us to unpack and dissect. And hopefully with the next series, we can get more people involved in it. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Stay tuned to our social media pages for our next online discussion on Black Lives Matter. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Impulse Cape Town, and on Instagram at Impulse CPT.
Hi, everybody. So, on the topic of Black Lives Matter, I'm not, well, unfortunately, I'm not one of those people that agree with the statement. I think people have forgotten that on a cellular level, we are all the same. And when people start making distinctions or start trying to favor a certain group or bring attention to a certain group, we forget about everybody else. We forget about everybody else that has been going through a hard time.
Closing off today, two fabulous girls ready in action to entertain you. Please welcome Miss Vida van Tabisha as well as Manila Vantes.
I don't need you to love me. I don't need you to love. I've got my sister. I can feel her now. She may not be here, but she's still mine, I know. She still loves me. Got my children, I can't hold them now. They may not be here, but they still mine, I hope. They know I still love them. Got my house, it still keep the cold out. Got my chair when my body can't hold out. Got my hands doing good like they supposed to, showing my heart to the folks that I'm close to. Got my eyes, though they don't see as far now. They see more about how things really are now. most of all, I'm thankful for loving who I really am. I'm beautiful. Yes, I'm beautiful.
Mask, gloves, soap, scrubs, TikTok, Grub, Hub, Twinks, Jocks, Bears, Cubs. Zoom is the new club. 6 feet, no hugs. Still beat these mugs. Sick beat, cut a rug. Joe Exotic is a bug. Kitty cat, tell me Carol Baskin. Where is the husband? Everyone's asking. Stimulus check, everybody better cash in. Mask and gloves, yeah, that's a new fashion. Girl, what did that girl just say, girl? Girl, I don't go to work. I don't leave, I stay. I don't care, I eat and sleep all day. And then I watch TV, that's just the tea, hunty. But till they set us free, then I'ma let you see. What you gonna let them see? My mask, gloves, soap, scrubs. Mask, gloves, soap, scrubs. Mask, gloves, soap, scrubs. Mask, gloves, soap, scrubs.
My mask, gloves, soap, scrubs. Mask, gloves, soap, scrubs. Mask, gloves, soap, scrubs. Mask, gloves, soap, scrubs.
No school, gym closed. Don't touch these clothes. Need food, this blows. Line at Trader Joe's. At home, gym, fish. Don't come close. Just wave, blow a kiss. Mask for mask, sis. Left, right, swiping on Tinder. What was life like? I can't remember. Needing my haircut, somebody shave her. Where is all of the toilet paper? Girl, what did that girl just say, girl? Girl, I don't go to work. I don't leave, I stay. I don't care, I eat and sleep all day. And then I watch TV, that's just the tea, hunty. But till they set us free, then I'ma let you see. What you gonna let them see? My mask, gloves, soap, scrubs. Mask, gloves, soap, scrubs. Mask, gloves, soap, scrubs. Mask, gloves, soap, scrubs.
My mask, gloves, soap, scrubs. Mask, gloves, soap, scrubs. Mask, gloves, soap, scrubs. Mask, gloves, soap, scrubs.
Okay, dolls, y'all know what time it is. Come on, stay inside and lock the door. Stay inside and lock the door. Now I want you to grab that sponge, grab that broom, get your shout, get your bleach. Cause I know you want to dance, but it's time to clean that dirt. Come on, mop for me, 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 mop. Tongue pop for me, pop for me. 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 Now spray for me, 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 spray. Stay away from me, away from me, away from me, away from me, away. Stay away from me, away from me, away from me, away from me, away. Now sweet for me, 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 sweet. Now sleep for me, 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 sleep. Fold close for me, close for me, close for me, close for me, close. Fold close for me, close for me, close for me, close for me, close. Hit the wall for me, the wall for me, the wall for me, the wall for me, the wall. Hit the wall for me, the wall for me, the wall for me, the wall for me, the wall. Now squirt for me, 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 squirt. Now twerk for me, 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 twerk for me. Hands on your knees for me, your knees for